James, good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Kurt.
We've got an interesting topic to talk about today. Let's about the McKinsey hack and some of the learnings and the things that we know about it, some of the things maybe that we can speculate on and ways that organizations can learn from this experience to better insulate themselves from the same sorts of problems. So, of course, James is a much decorated cybersecurity expert. Talking to him about leads the cybersecurity practice. And we're talking about what we learned from this whole experience. So it's rare that such a prestige brand and in the consulting service space, this is such egg on their face. It's so difficult to rationalize on what happened and what they were thinking.
It's pretty simple when you look at how AI is treated. And much of what you do with traditional security is you try to block it off. And you have controls in place. Let's run through McKinsey. They've got ISO, they've got SOC 2, they've got multiple compliance frameworks that say that they have a pretty mature security program in place. And what AI does is it kind of gets around all of the protections you put into place. So it's natural language. So you're not seeing it in a firewall or a WAF, a web application firewall. When they built their AI, they put it outside of the traditional controls that you would have in your software development lifecycle, or you would have in your production release. So some of those things didn't make sense for AI from the development of the AI models and the development of the AI prompts. It didn't make sense, but it proved that when you look at it, it really was something they should have thought about. This isn't a hack in a traditional sense, where people think they were hacked, they were breached, they were blackmailed. What had happened is that a vulnerability researcher developed an autonomous AI thing, and he went after it, McKinsey, just to see what he could see, and then he notified them what he found, and didn't steal things, and gave them back never took anything off site, but showed them what he was able to access, and then 3 days later, they patched their vulnerabilities and blocked off the access and made a public disclosure about it. So it was a very well handled breach. They did exactly the right things once they were notified. But what's scary is what he used is a 25-year-old vulnerability to get in, which is the SQL injection.
So the scale of the McKinsey platform, I believe Lilly, it's called, right?
Yeah.
The scale of that platform has just so many users, and it's so likely very critical to the way they do research and the way they perform their business to customers, both internally and to customer touching, that, the size and the scale of that, the amount of protection that they have is, again, 30,000 active users out of 43,000 McKinsey consultants is a large pool. What are your thoughts on the process or the methodology or the walls that they put up to try to protect against this? And what do we learn from that?
So let's go through what happened. In February, they were breached by a security researcher. There were 43,000 global employees. They had 57,000 users in the system. So plus or minus 10,000. I don't know where the extras are, but they had a 30,000 active users, active daily users. So they had a 70% adoption rate throughout their company. They processed about 500,000 prompts per month. So they had it's a significant usage, and Lilly was built on top of their proprietary database, which they've had for essentially the last 25 years. It's all their research, it's all their customer files, it's all their recommendations, where they have everything that they've done centralized so that they had a pool of knowledge that they had. And then they built Lilly on top of that so they could get the information that they had or get intelligence out of the information that they had. So what happened is the attacker was just an autonomous security agent built by researchers called CodeWall. And the attacker had no inside information, no knowledge, no credentials, and no human in the loop. Just the domain and the ability to start searching around it. And within two hours, he had right access to the production database, which is the real key thing, is because if he was malevolent, he could have changed the prompts. He could have changed the way that everything is interpreted. He could have changed how McKinsey did business because they didn't have it completely secured. again, the timeline was February 28th, they identified the vulnerability. He was able to exploit it. He provided that information to McKinsey. By March 12th, they had patched their endpoints. And by March 9th, they made a public disclosure. So it was a very well handled, very well tightly contained vulnerability. But who knows what was able to do this before, whether it was, a nation state or a competitor or.
When you talk about the 25-year vulnerability or access point, let's just for the audience sake, talk a little bit about what they did to be able to enter.
What they did was they were able to do SQL injection through JSON keys. That SQL injection is something that we've known about and have been preventing against for 25 years. Because they were JSON field names, which are keys, rather than directly into the SQL, traditionally what you do to prevent SQL injection is you parameterize the values that you want to put into the database. You take those in SQL injection, you corrupt what you're writing to the database or what request you're asking from the database. So you corrupt that, and that's how you get it. That was fine, and that's what they were doing, but they weren't looking at how they were packaging it up, which is when you're using AI and when you're using Web 2.0, essentially, you're using JSON to send those files to the database server, those requests to the database server. And if you corrupt the keys, then you get around what the SQL server is looking at, and you get around what the WAF is looking at, and that's how they got through.
Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that they bypassed or how they missed this along the way. Or do you have a sense of some of the tools that they were using?
They listed that they were using OWASP. It's very common listing for the top 10, top 20, top 25 vulnerabilities that databases and web servers hit. And they have something called a ZAP scanner, and it looks for those common breach points. Their internal security scanners, they didn't say which ones they had, but they didn't find any. And their standard SQL injected checks looked at the values, but not the keys. And the really interesting thing that the AI tool that went after this was able to do is it was able to piece together a path in based on something that people have missed for forever. So people have been trying to look at how to secure things. It was able to piece together that the JSON is not being looked at. So I can use that as the point. And that's because it can process, thousands of instructions per minute, and there's no human fatigue, and it pieces together and it learns. And that's kind of what happened here, is that it took different pieces and then it was able to find a way in using different pieces.
Wasn't there a piece of this that included external publicly exposed documentation that they were able to?
Yeah, that's the other piece. It was all of their API endpoints, or 200 of them, were publicly defined. So that's not uncommon where you have an API endpoint or you have an API command. And I'm trying to think of how to explain it in very basic terms. So API is how we talk to web servers, it's an application interface. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to do specific instructions to the database or to the web server to do specific things. And you have a public definition. So if you want this to be public, you define what you're expecting and what you're going to give back so that you can have two machines that can talk to each other through code. And when you expose your endpoints publicly, anybody can figure out what you're doing with this specific tool. For example, I'm going to make this up. It's not for McKinsey, but if I wanted to authorize a credit card, I would say, I want a credit card number, I want an expiration date, and I want a CCV code, and I need it in this format and the amount. And then I'll give it back to an authorization number and the amount so that a machine can say, here's a credit card. Another machine can say, here's the authorization. And you can go ahead and make that payment. And you would define that and you would share that with the people that you wanted to access your API. The problem with having a public endpoint or having your APIs defined publicly is now anybody can look at it and anybody can figure out, okay, so what are they looking for? How can I get around that? One of the things that we find in security is that what I call the happy path always works. This is what happens when I get what I'm expected to get, and this is what I'll give you. But when I break what I'm supposed to be sending, how does that play out? And a lot of times when I change the parameter, if the error is not handled correctly, it breaks things in ways that I can then manipulate. So they had 200 APIs, of which 22 of them didn't require authentication. There were 200 endpoints, 178 of them required authentication. So those couldn't be easily exploited. You would have to break the authentication. But of the 22 unauthenticated endpoints, he was able to use the JSON key in a malicious way to get around the things. And then based on that, he was able to break in and say, I'm able to get into this. And it went from, wow, I was able to do this on this one, to like, oh, wow, I can really do this. And that's kind of where we got to with this exploit.
Let's pivot a little bit and talk about the data that was exposed.
To me, it's just mind blowing how much data essentially their crown jewels were exposed. 46.5 million chats were exposed. So 46.5, every single conversation was stored in plain text in the database. Discussions about strategy, client engagements, financial, even M&A activity. They knew what McKinsey was telling their customers. They knew what their clients were telling McKinsey. They knew what the financials were in certain M&A activity. That's all devastating if it's out in the public.
Yeah. Account acquisition strategy.
Yep.
Embarrassing things like, I'm sure, internal communications.
The fact
profitability of the accounts or sales strategy or what they're going to do next within the account, all of those things.
Or if there's a threatened lawsuit that never materializes. That's not a material claim, but if somebody threatens a lawsuit and they say, here's how we'll handle it, but that's a material thing in a transaction.
Yeah.
And if the wrong person gets a hold of it, they can lose it. They also had all of their internal research and analysis publicly available. Or I shouldn't say public. This guy could get to all of their internal research and analysis. And it was all accessible without authentication.
And I know, I'm sure the McKinsey, I mean, you just think about the amount of money they put into the research that they do and the asset that they've built, accumulated over the years. Also, just the idea that they're privy to has such a material impact on stock values and making money around the acquisitions and divestitures. Other information that you came across in your discovery of this that you wanted to talk about, James?
The main thing that, just to get the scope of it, 728,000 files were exposed. PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints, Word documents, all being able to direct download URLs without authentication to anybody who knew where to look. And if you're McKinsey, that's terrifying. That's 250,000 confidential documents that somebody could have had access to. Some of them were probably public, but most of them were probably not. There were 57,000 user accounts on the system, full organizational structure. So he could pull out of that and then create an org chart and figure out how to manipulate through the organization with their titles and where they are and where they sit. They had 3.6 million RAG documents. RAG is kind of how you chunk up big documents to allow AI to search and only focus on the relevant parts. So if you have boilerplate on either end of a thing, you don't need to put the boilerplate into your RAG, but you have those documents those chunks of the documents that are not boilerplate in the RAG, so the AI can make sense out of it. And that included decades of proprietary McKinsey research, frameworks and methodologies for how they engage with their clients or how they engage with their works. They called it the firm's crown jewels. That's their intellectual crown jewels. And they also found S3 storage paths, so where they stored those files in the AWS S3. All of that was available to the attacker. The other key crown jewel that they were able to get to is model configurations across 12 model types. So how do they talk to different models, different AI models? System prompts. So how they want the AI to respond, what the guardrails and safety mechanisms are. When you have the guardrails and safety mechanisms, what do? You're able to work within those guardrails so you don't leave a trail, and how to get around the safety mechanism. And then the full model stack, including the fine-tuning stuff. So pretty much everything you needed to do to recreate what McKinsey has done. You could download the data, download the model download all that stuff, and you can recreate the McKinsey way through Lilly.
Let's talk a little bit about the compromising of the prompt layer and some of the implications of what that means and the implications of what it could have meant to McKinsey if it were a truly external hack or a rogue nation, rogue employee, or
a malicious actor could have poisoned the advice that McKinsey was giving their customers. It could have subtly changed the financial modeling to say go, no-go decision on a merger or acquisition, say go instead of a no-go, and bankrupt the company. It could have changed the strategic recommendations that they were giving to their customers. It could have changed, a slight modification or a risk assessment. And all of McKinsey's 43,000 consultants that are out there would trust the output because it looks like it's good. And it's followed the way they've been doing business for 25 years. But now you can't really trust it because it could have been altered and you don't know. So being able to change how the prompts and the parameters of the prompts to give you the go, no-go decision or the financial model that you're looking at, making it slightly off, could have devastating impacts to McKinsey. And because the AI is able to put stuff out, the Lilly AI, their core models, you have a huge data exfiltration problem. You could get that AI to embed confidential information in what it's sending out to its customers. So instead of sending out, clean, publicly available information, it could send out proprietary information in the documents that it's sending out. The other thing that really is scary is that because it had access to what the guardrails are in the system prompts, it could change those guardrails. So it can say, if you have an assumption of 96% accuracy, you can make this call. Otherwise, this is the right call. Or if it's a 70%, you want to do a hedge bet or 50-50, call it a 50-50. So you say make everything 100%. Now you're making bad decisions or bad judgments based on the changed guardrails that the system has. The other thing that's important to point out is that there's no log trail here. This is all normal behavior of AI. So it's not captured in a log trail. Unlike if you had a compromised server, you'd have a log trail of what's going on that server. You'd have file changes, dates, and times. And then you'd have the AI just starts behaving differently so that nobody notices it until after the damage is done. And they're like, why did you recommend we buy that company when they were definitely outside of the parameters we gave you? You don't know that until after the damage is done.
Let's also apply this or think about this in the context of other things we've seen in the marketplace. Let's talk about another example of something like this that you've seen in your past.
Yeah. So one of the closely parallel things I've seen is it's very similar to a manufacturer, a $50 million a year manufacturing company that I was brought in to help fix. They had a very similar situation as McKinsey. They had ISO certifications. They had security investment in decent security tools. They had multiple security scanning tools where they're scanning things, but they left a service account with VPN access that shouldn't have had it, and they never went back and they did it for some reason, and they never went back and fixed it. And in McKinsey, it's equivalent to the SQL injection. They didn't have the SQL injection set to things. And so if the exceptions killed both of those companies. Unauthenticated endpoints, SQL and JSON keys, nobody checks them. Prompts in a writable database, because people are treating prompts as configuration data rather than as code these days. And it's something that we've seen over I've seen it over the 40 years I've been doing this. We build fortresses around with walls, but then we leave the side door unlocked to allow somebody for convenience. And we never go back and we open it for the electrician to come in, and we never go back and lock that door. That's kind of what I see happening here.
What was the breach with that client? How bad was it? So comparatively,
the attacker was able to deploy a ransomware bomb. So they were able to get in and deploy ransomware and cause significant disruption to the organization.
Were they able to fend that off before paying the ransom, or did they?
Yeah, they were able to get out. They got lucky. They had a backup system. So their backups were affected by the ransomware, but they had a backup system that they were turning off that they never turned off. So they had good backups in a different environment. So they were able to recover fairly quickly. They also had a very alert system administrator who saw something going wonky. and he was in the Asia Pacific area. So the ransomware was deployed in the U.S. on a holiday weekend at like 3 o'clock in the morning, but it was a Saturday afternoon, and the system administrator in a different country, different time zone, was on call and was able to see that something was going wrong. So he was able to limit the damage.
Yeah, I love that story. As a part of the story arc is that there was delaying going on with paying the ransomware.
Yeah.
And then we bought enough time in order to be able to rebuild and not have to pay the ransomware and have make sure that everything was secure and was in order.
Yeah, and it's a $500 million a year company. They were demanding $50 million for the ransomware. And if you're a $500 million a year electronics manufacturer, $15 million is pretty much all of your operating budget for the year.
So some of the learnings I think that we've talked about with clients is the notion that there are new assets or things that you have to secure as a part of your environment, and that you've got software, you've got hardware, you've got supply chains, you've got databases. Those are the things that we're very accustomed to securing and making sure that there's a strong set of policies and methods in place to make sure that there isn't a problem. But there are some new items and capabilities, things that have to be secured as well. Why don't you share with what those are?
So in a traditional breach that people are familiar with, the attacker is going to steal data, you detect it, you lock them out, and then you try to figure out what they took. But today, with an AI platform breach, the attacker can still steal data, plus the attacker now can poison the AI's instructions and start modification of the behavior. So the trusted output becomes untrustworthy, and they don't need to redeploy things. They don't need to change code. All they need to do is have access to the prompts. And the damage assessment is going from what did they take and what is it worth to what did they change and how long has it been giving bad advice? Because now you have to go back and clean up what's been happening to the AI since it was breached. So the organizations, we have what we call the new crown jewels. The organization has spent decades securing code repositories, servers and infrastructure, supply chains, database credentials. We have to start treating our prompts and our AI configurations as high value assets. So today they're storing prompts in databases. They're passed through APIs. They're cached in configuration files. All of the prompts are cached in configuration files, and we have almost no version control on our prompts because they're constantly changing, and there's no integrity monitoring. But the prompts still have output that employees and clients trust, outputs that clients receive and make actions on, and decisions that are built upon them. The thing that worries me is with the onset of agentic AI is that agents will be taking action based on AI that may or may not be trustworthy.
What other lessons, takeaways do we have as we think about the changes in cybersecurity inside an organization and making sure that besides being compliant with NIST and all those various compliance frameworks, but there's also focus and energy and dedication, I think, to making sure that they've got their most up to date and really understand the nuance in the buckets where they have to do cyber.
One of the big lessons that this particular breach teaches is that fundamentals still matter. SQL injection has been an OWASP top 10 since 2003, and it's been a known thing since the late 1990s. So that is what took down the biggest consultancy in one of the most sophisticated organizations in the world. So don't get so focused on AI specific threats that you just forget to do your basic blocking and tackling. The other thing that really changes is that autonomous attackers change the game. Traditionally, you have a manual testing. It takes a really, really smart person with a really, really deep knowledge of computer security to go through and follow the checklist. You do manual things, and then you have limited time and attention because people do need to eat. They do need to sleep. And that's the big thing about an autonomous agent, is that it's continually testing the things. It's always running. It runs 24/7. It does things at machine speed that human beings can't do. It doesn't get impatient. It doesn't get bored. It doesn't get frustrated. and it looks for patterns. And the pattern recognition is what the large language models are built off of, is pattern recognition. And then it hits things like JSON and keys and SQL. And in this case, it took them only 2 hours to break through.
Are there any last thoughts or things that we want to bring to the audience attention on this, James? I think that we've gone through a number of best practices and some of the vulnerabilities that we see out there.
The thing that we need to start doing, and we're developing a framework for AI security, but kind of what we have to do here is, one of the main things is we have to store prompts as code. They are code. We have to treat them as such. They're not just configuration. They're not just documents. They're code. We have to have version control on our prompts. We have to adapt our code review to a prompt review process. We have to have deployment procedures, just like we do for code. We have to run it in test. You have to run it in dev. You have to QA it, and then you roll it into production. You have to have the ability to roll back if something's going wrong, as well as one of the key things is integrity monitor. How do you know if that prompt has changed from the one that you tested and that you wanted to do it? That's one of the key things that we have to implement, as well as access controls and audit logging. And for the love of God, don't store them in a writable database.
One of the things that we often talk to clients about is either 2 points in time. One is more front end loaded, which is, what's your strategy? How much are you going to invest based on what's the best set of technologies that's out there, or the best for me based on the size of my company, my risk profile, my budgets, what the technology that I already have, I have knowledge inside my organization around. So helping clients build a roadmap that meets their objectives, or that are appropriate against those parameters. And then I also think that there's a lot of point in time help. Is I already have my strategy. I now need to be able to figure out where I am in my roadmap, and where am I against the KPIs that I may have promised to management or the board, and and as things change, maybe there's midstream corrections that need to take place with this, what I'm doing with cyber, and what my investment strategy looks like, my people strategy around, again, making sure that the McKinsey situation doesn't happen to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, James, thanks very much for your time, as usual. Good
Thanks
to
for
chat
having
about
me.
this. And we will talk again soon.
All right. Thank you, Kurt. You have a great day.